What's the name of that building? Up on Capitol Hill? The one that's powered by...
Could be radiation or something.
Yeah, the bullets. Yeah.
Bullet, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Bullets, that's it, yeah.
Very much for coming this evening. I'm Robinette.
Hello, everybody.
Sorry, I should have dinged the glass.
Robinette, would you like the microphone?
No.
Any questions? Are there any questions?
Well, I'm Robinette with Club Programs and the liaison with the In the Know Committee. And there's several of you here in presence and help get this organized. I want to introduce you to our infamous photographer and writer and editor. We have Paul Dorpat and Jean Sherrard and Clay Eals. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Absolutely.
There you go.
Write
And
that down now.
they're going to talk. I see that there's a 4th-generation Seattleites here, so we're going to learn a lot about the city. And let's give them a good round of applause.
Well, thank you, Robinette.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Jean will take over now.
Well, thank you, Paul. Well, the beginning of our show is always, we spend a few minutes just doing a little biography of Paul.
No, not every show. You sure you want to do it this time?
I do. I do. We'll go quickly, Paul. If you don't interrupt me, it'll go fast.
All right.
You know, because Paul often stops and asks for applause, but we're just going to. So let's go forward. We begin virtually every show with this short bio of Paul. We brought out this book on October 28th of last year. That was the launch date, and it was Paul's 80th birthday.
Coincidence, right?
It was a coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence. So we had planned to have the book in hand by mid-October, and we ended up in a little trade war with China. How did that happen? Well, we won't go into it. But the book was delayed until early December. We didn't have it in the stores. We had 5,000 copies appear, and we were a little bit worried, but we discovered only a couple weeks ago, I heard from our distributor that we sold, in that 3-week period before the holidays, we sold 4,000 of the 5,000 books. So we've done pretty well. We just ordered another 5,000. We're down to about 500 now. So
We were running out of them, and that they should probably buy more than one copy.
Paul is always, he's Paul on our website. We identify him as huckster and historian. So watch out. So let's begin with the biographical portion of our show, celebrating Paul's 80th birthday, and now he's in his, aren't we in your 81st year? Isn't that what we say now? He's in his 81st year, yeah, okay.
It feels like it.
Here we go. All right.
This is Your Life, a program for all Americans.
Oop.
Now here he is, Mr. This Is Your Life himself, Ralph Edwards.
Oh, it didn't come
What
up.
happened?
Well, the video didn't show up. Let's go on. Let's see.
It was because I cursed him.
You cursed it, Paul. Well, to describe it, the video was taken from the opening of Ralph Edwards, and I pasted my face on in Photoshop. So it was very clever, and you'll just have to trust us. Well, this is Paul, and when he's we guess he's about 5 years old. And it's, where are you now? Here, Paul.
Backyard at the family parsonage in Grand Forks, North Dakota, right up against the shores of the Red River that would overflow into floods and frequently. And here I am during the World War II, saving the world for democracy.
Yes.
Now, it's lovely. Saving the world for democracy. And Paul was the youngest Lutheran pastor in 1942.
No. My dad, I was the youngest son of a Lutheran pastor.
Oh, I always got that confused.
Yeah.
I thought you were you'd get up. He was an early reader, so. All right, well, let's go forward. We're going to go a little bit back, and there's Paul, the baby of the family. And
You guys
here's,
all go through this. Oh. Can we show it again? Say it again, then say what you're going to.
Oh, baby of the family.
Thank you.
Okay.
You get this recorded, Clay?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
And there's one brother that Paul calls the handsome one.
Which one is that? Let's have them choose, okay? Which
This
one
guy,
is it? Which
this
one's
guy,
the handsome
this
one?
guy.
the baby.
All of them.
Well, they always,
Of course, yeah. Not counting the baby.
you know, that when Paul was a baby, they had to tie stakes around his neck for the dog to play with him. It was tough with those poor, no, that's not true. He was adored. He was adored.
Was I?
You were. I've seen your brothers adore you, and I'm going to prove it. So here's the handsome one. Here's his older brother, Ted. And who's this?
That's Dave.
That's Dave. Okay, let's go
He
forward.
developed late. Go ahead.
Well, we're going to see them, the four brothers, all together about 15 years ago, and you'll see the handsome one because, of course, he has a glass of wine. What's going on here? Let's go back. Try it again.
Oh, this is embarrassing. It seems we're having
Uh-oh.
mechanical problems. Now, is anybody that's got any mechanical solutions?
No, I'm going to go up to the computer and see if I can change it. Hold on.
Oh boy, this is embarrassing. All right, it's time for questions now. Go ahead, ask your questions and we'll answer them. Go ahead, let's see the first question. Raise your
Oh,
hand.
there you are.
There they
We
are.
don't need a
skip it.
question.
What's the question?
We don't need one.
We're back.
You know
that.
already, okay, very good.
There we go. Okay, so these are Paul and his brother, and of course, oh, there he is, the handsome one, with his
Isn't he
glass
good?
of wine.
Isn't he good looking?
All good looking.
Oh, thank you very much. You've been tricked into that, actually. Thank you very much. Now, should we take questions now?
No.
Oh,
Okay, and here's Paul with his dad, the Reverend. You can see why I mistook them.
Oh.
You know, they're vocally they were very similar, and they had the same facial hair. And his mom Cherry, who did not have the same facial hair. Well, in the late 60s, Paul started an underground newspaper in Seattle called The Helix. And he was the editor. Lots of wonderful people wrote and designed it and drew art for it. And by within a year, he had also parlayed that into a rock festival. This is a year before Woodstock, so it's the first outdoor multi-day rock festival held on a farm in the entire world, and Paul produced it. Am I right there, Paul?
I'll accept that. I'll accept
Who was
that.
there? Someone was there.
Stand
Oh,
up.
we have an
Stand up.
Wow.
Have her stand up.
You've got to stand. You've got to stand.
Richard
yeah.
Pryor?
Why would you stand?
You got. Paul wants you to stand. He can't see you there. Okay, there we go.
You were there.
I also took a class from you at the last exit on Brooklyn when I was in high school. So probably in like 69 or 70.
What was I teaching?
I don't know. I think we did some yoga poses and. That's really nothing.
Are you sure it was me?
Yeah, it was you.
It was me. I never taught anybody yoga.
No, it was. You just like did a. I don't know. Sun salutation.
Well,
Maybe it was a yoga dance or something.
Yeah.
let's continue forward here because which of the performers did you most enjoy in this
Well,
list
it
here?
was all a blur, but I think.
If you remember the
Grateful
60s,
Dead.
you weren't there.
That's true. What was it?
The Grateful Dead were there? Is that?
Yep.
Really?
Grateful Dead was at that particular cafe then?
No, in the here
I think the Grateful Dead were.
with the Grateful
They
Dead.
showed up last.
And they
Yeah,
had
at the
two
end of the day.
drummers.
Yeah.
The only time they performed with two drummers, and it was quite spectacular.
That's right. The
Yeah, it
Grateful
was-
Dead just showed up on their own. They
Yeah.
just showed up on their own. And Country Joe and the Fish was right before them.
Right.
Remember Country Joe and the Fish?
Yes, I
Oh,
do.
good for you. Very hip.
Well, let's proceed forward because as this festival transpired, it rained the whole time. You can attest to that. And there was, we're doing it again. I'm just going to have to go back here.
I
Let's
think
see.
it is, Pete.
I have no idea. Let's go straight back. Let's try this way to get there.
Clay takes care of this stuff.
There we go. Okay, I'm going to do this, and then we'll go to here. We'll go to the next slide.
Do you know what this church is? Huh?
No.
In Paris?
Oh,
On the
it's not
island?
on there now.
Huh?
There's no church on there now.
Oh, sorry.
So this is Paul with Tom Robbins, who also came to the Sky River on that same weekend, and it's kind of wet. You can see there's some wetness there. Well, let's go forward and we're going to look at just how wet it was, because for a couple hours the sun came out. Are you in this picture?
Look at this picture.
Not anywhere near the mud.
Yeah.
Well, it's really exciting to meet you.
Well, for some reason they called this Mud River.
I've
That's
never
not
heard,
just
have you ever
Sky
heard it
River.
described as Mud River?
Yeah, it's a mess.
You're a little soft smoking for me.
Well, when Paul, we jump forward about 10 years, and just before he began the Seattle Times column, Paul released a book called 294 Glimpses of Historic Seattle, and he sold it for a penny a glimpse. So I think...
For the Mayor's Small Business Task Force, it was a benefit for the Mayor's Small Business Task Force, okay? I didn't get anything out of it. I hardly ever got anything out of anything, because I didn't have any particular need of it. Go ahead.
I thought we were supposed to groan at that point when you said...
No, you're supposed to applaud. Oh, how nice of you.
I guess now we need applause.
Is that Wes Ullman?
What's that?
Was that Wes Ullman?
No, it's right after Royer.
Charlie
Royer and I
Royer.
were all football friends from the park in his early mayoral career. Did you know Royer? Yeah.
Well, here we are. You guys are all...
What happened to him?
You know who this is. But you might have read his book from the 50s, Skid Road. That's Paul's mentor, Murray Morgan.
Morgan, yeah, bless him. And they just reprint.
They just did a reprint.
That's a great book.
It's a
You said It's a
masterpiece.
great book.
Yeah.
You did?
Huh?
Did you say it's a great book?
It's a great book, yeah.
Did you teach it?
I did teach it.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, 4th grade.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's a wonderful book. Wonderful guy. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, did it again. Okay.
Oh my God.
Here we
Somebody
go.
carrying maybe a computer in their purse?
Well, this is Paul interviewing. He often went out and still goes out and interviews people who are witnesses to history. And in this case, he was interviewing Lucy Campbell Coe, who in the 80s, she must have been in her mid-90s at this point. At a very young age, 3 or 4 years old, she was witness to the Seattle fire of 1889.
I met 4 different people that had witnessed the fire in the early part of my research. 4 of them.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm an old man. Well, I'm 80. That's fairly old.
June 6th.
And Paul and I started working together on our first book, Washington Then and Now, and that came out about 12 years ago. And we also did, within a few years, we did a massive exhibit at Mohi, the old Mohi, and filled up one of their big rooms with now and thens from all over the state and the city, and we even filled the foyer with some now and thens from Paris, supplied by our friend Bérengère Lemont, who came out 2011 and joined us for this program. And there's Bérengère. And now we're going to duck back to 2005, and we'll finish off our little bio with a wonderful coincident moment in Paris, in the 5th arrondissement of Paris. And it's about a minute long, and keep your eye on the bouncing Paul.
What's the name for something that's coincident but has a good fortune to it? Serendipity.
Serendipity.
Or fortuitous, yeah. So
So,
a serendipitous moment.
and I,
He looks very much like me, doesn't he? He does. With the glasses, with the glasses. Here we go. Take this video. Okay.
Who's in Paris?
Let's sit down. Okay.
Gene, is that your camera work?
That's,
You've improved since then.
so Paul Paul gets up and starts to walk away, and Berenger says, "No, go back. I have to get a photograph of the two of you together." So he sits back down, and in about 10, 15 seconds, I just start to laugh, and I can't stop the camera from shaking. But there's a marvelous moment when the two of them look up at me.
Oh, pardon.
All right, now we're gonna take a vote. Should we keep that in the show? Say yes? Yes. Or say no if you think it should be out.
No, everybody likes that.
Okay, all right. Well, nobody's willing to say no then, that's all.
Well, here's the fellow, and he's actually a Romanian Orthodox priest. And Berenger went back about 3 or 4 years later and took a picture of him in his church where he just won a major prize for restoration. But they're traveling down the same line. Did your dad ever get to Paris, Paul?
Yes.
Uh-oh.
I have a picture of her mom and dad in Paris I can give you.
He was with your mom?
Yeah,
Wow.
I'll find that for you. and send it
Okay.
to you. Yeah. They're with the not Space Needle, what do you call it? Eiffel Tower. They're right there.
Yeah, no, I remember that photo.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he met some Romanian woman there, huh?
No.
Is that- oh. Well, let's get on to the book now, and we're going to start.
Are you ready to buy copies yet?
We're going to start with Paul's very first photo that was featured in the Times. I think it's January 17th, 1982. And this is the 16th Coastal Artillery.
Yeah.
Returning home from the First World War, so it's 1919. We're at the corner of 4th and Pike, so we're looking north up towards Westlake. And one of the jobs that I have undertaken over the last couple of years, we chose about 100 subjects out of Paul's 1,800 columns that he's written since 1982. 37 years of columns, and we chose, one of my jobs has been to go back and retake modern photos of these settings, but trying to find something that justified the retake. So here, in early 2017, I think it was January 21st, I went back and I found a march. Let's take a look. And this was the Women's March, and I think it was the largest march in Seattle history, the greatest number of folks marching down the street from.
Any of you go to it?
Yes.
One there, okay.
So we're right where Ben Bridge is.
Yep.
Yes.
Speak up.
Are you there? Are you in the photo?
No. No.
So there were a couple of you there, okay.
Okay.
Jean, what year was it?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, 2017 in January.
I would like to, can I just take a moment, please? Thank you. All right, you fixed it.
All right, I'll fix
There
it.
is a nice coincidence today regarding this, what is it, 38 years?
37.
37 years, is that recently I decided that I wanted to quit so that I could write some books and I wouldn't have any other things to concentrate on. And so, I only agreed to do that, or thought I could get away with doing it, because these guys were around and they were, equally as good as I in any of the things that I did, and they were ready to take over. So today we had lunch with the Times editor, not the honcho editor, but the editor of the paper, the magazine, and they were very nice about it. They quite appreciate it, and it's going to work out. So these guys will be responsible for the thing that I had for the last 37 years, and they'll do, frankly, a better job than I, because there's two of them, and they can help each other, What's wrong with that?
Nothing.
What was wrong with it?
Nothing's wrong with it, but
Somebody
you're
thought
going
it was funny.
I didn't think it was funny. I took it very seriously. I did indeed.
Well, anyway, they're going to do a great job.
Well, we'll do a great job, but the truth is that for the next year or so, Paul is going to be our senior advisor as well, so you're not divorcing yourself.
Well, I'm not taking pay.
All right. Yeah.
They don't pay anyway.
I just want to add a little bit here. You need to understand, you probably already think about it subliminally, but I just want to get it out on the table. There is no column like this that we know of anywhere in the country that has lasted 37 years and it's come out every single week in the newspaper. This guy created something unique and he deserves all the veneration that he can get.
Would you all like to get up maybe?
I told you this would be just an evening of constant adulation. Well, this is the very first photo that Paul took for the very first column. And you can see the lovely barista on the side holding the photograph that ended up in the paper. So the way we organized the 100 subjects in the book was in the order in which they were published in the Times. So they're not chronological, they are, but they follow the publication order in the Times. So second, a number of classic, here's what it looks like in the book, in the first pages of the book. And in the second subject, and this is also from '82, so Paul front-loaded some very important photos in the early part of his column, and this was the 1880 snow in Seattle. And Elisha P. Ferry, the governor at the time, in 1879, Elisha P. Ferry said, he made a proclamation of the territory and said, the wonderful thing about the Northwest is the clement weather, and how wonderful it was. And they published his proclamation in the Sunday paper on January 4th, and the next day it started to snow. And it snowed for 8 days, and a total of 64 inches, which makes our recent flurry look kind of light by comparison. Climate change, perhaps. Well, this is significant time after the snow fell. You're looking right here at what? Paul, you want to describe this?
That's Cherry Street, looking east from the corner of Front Street, which was called Front Street's First Avenue. And that is Yesler's Pavilion on the right, where all sorts of events in the city took place. And up behind him is the sheriff's home, and behind that is the Baptist church. How many of you Baptists here? Well, that's good. Be sure to go to church this Sunday. And then behind that is another house, and behind that is several other houses. And then behind those are several more houses. They're all hidden behind the horizon.
In the snow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I went back
Are there really
today.
any Baptists here at all? That's
I guess
unusual.
not.
Usually you find Baptists.
We're going to jump forward to my effort, and this is actually an example of melancholy and failure, I think, with a small success. But let's take a look. Well, I tried to get to First and Cherry, and you know, in my defense, there was a little snow on that hydrant there.
I would think we should give them an applause for that.
I know.
Very good. Very good. Let me say,
Uh-oh.
the quality of the contemporary photography in this book, given also that it is color, and that the printing was done by a better system of professionals that he organized. Well, they were all organized already, but he chose them to help. Is so wonderful. It's just beautiful. So that you'll want to send copies of this book to all your relatives. It's a beautiful book, and it's going to win some. How about it? Going to win prizes at all?
It's already won a couple prizes, yeah. So,
Well, what are they?
well, maybe we'll talk about that as we proceed.
Next year?
Yeah, we'll go forward. But we have won a couple of prizes, and we hope for more. There's nothing like a nice prize. This is a photograph taken by the Norwegian photographer who came to Seattle in the 1890s. What was his name, Paul?
You help us out. What was it?
Oh, man. Tell me.
You lost it for a second.
I just lost it. His name is Anders Vilsa. This is the 30th show I've done, and Paul,
That was kind of mean.
I got surprised by the awards, and I forgot about Anders. Anders Vilsa was a tremendous photographer, spent several years taking really luminous and wonderful photos. This is with his bike back to Pike, and you'll see today how quickly, because this book just came out again in the end of October, and the last photos for it were taken in June of last summer. So this is the photo I took a couple months before, and the viaduct is rapidly disappearing.
Those are his kids,
Yeah, those are my students.
his students rather, yeah. Clay, not Clay, that's Clay. Jean teaches at Hillside Academy on Cougar Mountain, really a sort of a school for bright kids, it turns out. They were primarily bright because they chose that school, but it also turns out that they got good grades. So.
Well, this is another Anders Filsa photo, and it was taken 1898 or 99, and it's right at the height of the gold rush. In about a 6-month period in the winter of 98, 99, the 110 ships came from Seattle and went up to the Yukon filled with men looking to make money. And if you look now on the waterfront here, there's a wonderful sign that reads, "Portable aluminum houses, just the thing for Alaska. Weight 150 pounds.
And we're looking north to Alaska.
We're looking north. And it's right in front of what is now the Coleman Dock. There's the Marion Street pedestrian overpass. Every third slide this happens. Isn't that strange?
Well, who can we blame for this?
I don't know. In 2015, Norway honored Anders Filsa with a series of stamps celebrating this spectacular photography. He moved back to Norway in early 1900 and became the national treasure of Norway for the next 30 years, taking photos of village life and scenery. And so this set of stamps came out only about 4 years ago, but they give you a sense of the photographer he became, sort of the Edward Curtis, Ansel Adams of Norway.
He might have actually been that for the United States because he didn't want to go back to Norway, but his wife insisted for a family reunion. And then when he got there, she said, "You're not going back. If you want me, you've got to stay in Norway." So he stayed, and then he became famous as a Norwegian by Norwegians. So when you get married, you might want to take that into consideration.
Don't marry a Norwegian?
I don't know what the consideration would be.
Oh. Well, this photo was taken...
You could write it in your contract.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, okay.
This photo was taken from the almost completed Smith Tower, the 35th floor observation deck. It's 1913. As with so many tall buildings, in fact, when we last did a show at WAC about 2 years ago, Robert Laurenti and I went up on top of your building here and retook a bunch of photos that were taken upon construction of this building. And
Is Robert here tonight?
He is. He's sitting at the back.
Oh,
He's about to
stand up, Robert.
He's about to head off for a musical event tonight. But
Are you singing, Robert? Are you singing?
he's going to a musical.
Oh, he's not singing. No, he doesn't have to go. Right? Okay.
That's true. He
That's
doesn't
all right,
have to
Robert. That's all
go.
right.
Is that
Goodbye.
St. James in the background?
That is St. James in the background. You might be able to pick out some details here. From 2nd Avenue and Yesler in Maine, right about where the Smith Tower was, from the 35th floor, as you rose up, you suddenly saw what people had not seen from that vantage before, which is Lake Union. And there's Queen Anne and Queen Anne High School up there. And there's St. James, and down here is the Rainier Club.
Yeah.
And you can see the Methodist Dome behind it.
Oh,
Any
yeah.
of you go to Queen Anne?
This is 1913. We're still a year away from opening. So Frank Noel, the Webster and Stevens photographer who climbed up here, is looking through the girders. It's not yet been clad, so he's looking through these open spaces over the city.
But it's after the AYP.
It is after AYP. It's 4 years after AYP. So
What was the
Smith
AYP?
Tower then is the tallest building,
Alaska, Yukon,
Oh, yes,
Pacific.
thank you.
and you'll see an image of it in a moment. The At this point, Smith Tower is the tallest structure west of the Mississippi and remained the tallest building in Seattle until the Space Needle. So it held pride of place for quite some time. We'll go today. I want you to keep your eyes on several different, just watch Lake Union in particular. Keep your eyes on Lake Union and watch the Rainier Club. So let's see if we can go forward. Are we going to get lucky here? Are you feeling lucky? Oh, there it is. Whoops.
It's in there somewhere.
It is in there somewhere. Yeah, it's bouncing reflections. But you can still see, up at the top here, you can still see St. James.
Oh, that's a great photo.
And that
When
might
you get the
be.
book, it's in the book.
I tried to buy that book earlier. I have to wait.
We had to wait probably.
Yeah, we had problems getting the book here.
Well, now you can have 2 or 3. But they won't be around for long. Go ahead.
Okay.
This, nothing. This is the Monongahela leaving Lake Union, a four-master, one of the last boats to escape from Lake Union before they finished the Aurora, or the formerly known George Washington Memorial Bridge. And they're towing it out. The Monongahela was built as an ocean-going craft in 1882 in Glasgow, and this is one of the last boats being towed out, last masted ships being towed out from Lake Union in early 31. So we're going to look at it today, and then Paul's going to exult over the.
Well, no, you shouldn't.
Uh-oh, no, here we go.
All right, oops,
There it is.
there it is, that's very nice. So, now I'm going to exalt, and what I'm going to exalt is Jean's contemporary photography. How many of you have relatives, let's say, or friends in the Midwest? Oh, well, then you know that they're very interested in the enchantments of your own home, and they come and visit you and sleep in your beds and all of that, and maybe help with the dinners and things like that. But what they really need to enjoy your home is this book. And I'm sure you want to consider your relatives and friends in the Midwest that they should have copies of this book.
Well,
Consider that.
and I have a.
You seem skeptical. You
I have-
seem skeptical.
No, he's pondering. I have a small confession to make, in that I actually waited for this craft
Good for you.
to replace the Monongahela, and it was sad. They did have to raise the Fremont Bridge for that boat, but it doesn't match the Monongahela. The bridge looks pretty good,
Isn't
though.
this a pretty picture?
Beautiful
And
photo.
Yeah.
the book is really filled with these kind of picturesque notions or romances with the city on the part of this man right here. Okay?
Well, this is a shot that I did not take. It was taken in the Smithsonian, where the Taft Key resides. The Taft Key is studded with 20 nuggets of gold mounted on Alaskan marble. It was made by George Carmack, who was the first human to discover gold in the Yukon. And so it was his initial discovery that made him a very wealthy man and led thousands up to join him. Well, in 1909, he gave this key to President Taft, and Taft used it to open the AYP, the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition. It's been used for decades. It was used until 1962 to inaugurate fairs and festivals and major openings by the presidents. So in DC, they would hit the key and that would send a signal to wherever they were sending the signal, in this case Seattle, and the fair would open. Well, the Taft Key was also used on this day, which is February 22nd, 1932. This is the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth, and they were opening the George Washington Memorial Bridge, or Aurora, we know it as today.
So this is just months after the photograph that we saw of the Monongahela, because they've closed the bridge and now they're getting ready to dedicate it, right? Okay.
So you have to imagine now the bridge empty, thousands and thousands of citizens on either side waiting to pour out onto the bridge, waiting for President Hoover to punch the Taft key, and below fireworks will go off, and fireboats will send up their plumes, and the flags will unfurl, and it's a major moment of connection and you know, combining these different bands of the city, these different hills, Queen Anne to Wallingford to Fremont. And so all these people are waiting on either side of the bridge, and the governor, Roland Hartley at the time, was a fierce opponent for years of a completed highway system. He thought the 99 was just, it was stupid and a waste of money. As Paul says, he's from Everett, so he couldn't know any better. Well, when the event came about, you had thousands waiting to hear this, for the opening. And Hartley got up in front of a microphone and he started to talk. And he spoke at great length and took full credit for this beautiful bridge, though he'd opposed it for his entire political career. And as he bloviated along, he lost track of time, and at 2:57 in the afternoon, Herbert Hoover pressed the Taft key, and everything went nuts. The flags unfurled, the fireboats shot off their steam, and the crowds poured cheering onto the bridge, and Roland Hartley never finished his speech.
He's still waiting for the applause.
But this is Clay Eals' favorite then photo in the book. It's just, it is a, look at the flag coming down. Who could have planned
Gene,
that?
it's a group hug.
It is a group hug.
Oh, wait, no. Skip it.
Yeah. So I go back, one little note. I have a 21-foot tall extension pole, and there are occasionally photographs that I just can't retake from the ground, and I can't get up high enough, or it's obscured by trees and branches, so I'll push it up in the air with my pole, and you'll see my camera up on top, and this is one of those photos that I, you know, the bank of Queen Anne was completely covered with trees, and it was either a chainsaw or the 21-foot pole. And yeah, chainsaw in prison, that's right. Oh, here we go. And there is that very moment. Herbert Hoover pressing the Taft key at 2:57 in the afternoon. So, it was used once more to inaugurate a Seattle festival. This is the Seattle World's Fair, opened by John F. Kennedy in 1962, and it's the Taft key again. This is the last time it was used, and it's been in the Smithsonian ever since.
All right, here's a question, a political question. How old was John F. Kennedy when he ran for president?
46?
Anybody know with confidence?
35.
35?
Yes.
Gene?
I don't know. I wasn't a friend.
35, are you confident of that?
Well, I was until other people started saying 40s.
Yeah.
He was a youngster, nevertheless.
All right, well, it turns out we don't know. We were just checking on the.
Shall I Google it?
Someone look up on their phone and you can shout it out.
We'll have an answer for you pretty soon.
Didn't have Google then.
No,
Because
no.
there's
Google.
a man that's running now as a Democrat, as a mayor of a small town.
Oh, South Bend.
Huh?
South Bend.
South Bend, yeah. And gosh, I saw him on television. He was amazingly eloquent.
Yeah, he's impressive.
Yeah,
Well, so back to the book.
sorry.
Well, there's time for this conversation. We can have a long one after the show.
43. 43.
Okay.
Good job.
So
Thank you.
Yep.
this is the, it's in the book. It was from a column we did in 2013, and it featured Paula Dahl, who is standing here. She was the 9 millionth visitor to the fair. She came in the last weeks of the fair. She's about 6 years old in this photo. And you can see her very proud parents, this lovely, it turns out, lavender dog, and her very bitter sister behind her. And here's Paula. She's an elementary school teacher in Issaquah, and here she still has the 9 millionth sign on her wall in Issaquah, and she tells this story to her kids. Well, We mentioned the Seattle fire before. This is one of those rare shots of the fire itself. It's thought, and Paul mentions this in this early column, that many of the photographers had their studios and their supplies downtown in the fire zone. So rather than take photographs, they were rescuing their equipment and hauling it out of the path of the fire. Everything in this photo disappeared. No one was killed except for quite a number of rats. But about 30 acres of Seattle were leveled, and it resulted in ordinances that insisted that these wooden buildings be replaced by brick and stone. And we can see some of those at First and Spring today. The aftermath of the fire. This picture was actually in the caption in the Times the next day. It was labeled the hideous remains. This is a very familiar corner, and you'll see it in just a moment. Watch this little section here. This is the front of a Flatiron building, which was the Occidental Hotel, and it's right about here.
It's the garage.
You all know the sinking ship garage down in Pioneer Square. Well, the Flatiron building was the Occidental Hotel, and when it was, Yesler's house was right about here, is the first location where Yesler built his little house on the Pioneer building site. Here we're looking at the same front as the Occidental Hotel. It was replaced soon after the fire by the Seattle Hotel, and we'll look at that now. Smith Tower isn't up yet. This is about 1908. It's the celebration of the Great White Fleet coming to town, so you can see celebrating citizens and flags and festoons, and perhaps a few sailors in the bunch. But what happened was, this beautiful hotel, the Seattle Hotel, which is on the same footprint as the Occidental, was torn down, and it ended up being replaced by the sinking ship garage.
Now, this was during the World's Fair, when we were becoming concerned about how we looked. And so we thought that this old Skid Road Hotel, which was only partially not vacant, should be torn down. And people wanted to put a garage up, were victorious in convincing the locals to let it happen. There was a lot of objection to it, and unfortunately objectors missed. They didn't win. They did tear it down, and the people that tore it down, the garage builders, indicated how sensitive they were to these objections by saying that, well, they were going to include the basket-handled windows that were on the historic structure. They're going to put those into the garage on the top floor. You see the pipes there? That's sensitive, isn't it? Okay. Which they did, and they're still there, and you can go down there and park your car there and caress them. Now, there you have it. Let's see, Gene, what else you got on this?
Oh, well, the next thing that happened here is there was a fair amount of resistance, and this particularly hurt the feelings of a man named Victor Steinbrook. And Victor led the charge to save the market, swearing that we will never lose such a substantive portion of our city again. And the market was under threat. And I was just reading, there's a story we just gave to the Times today, and even in the early 60s, I think 62, they were talking about getting rid of the market. And throughout the 60s, that was the threat, that they tear it all down. Well, Victor came out, and with thousands of Seattle residents said, we're not going to let this one go. So they saved the market. And that's why there's a park named after him at the north end of the market. So let's look at the market. This is 1907, right at the very start. And today, what a lovely place. You ever want to know what home feels like, just go down to the market and walk around.
How many of you actually shop in the market ever? Raise your, well, look at that size. Well, of course, they're lying. A lot of them not down there at all, but they know it's that
I have a
stuff.
dentist down in the market.
Go ahead. What's that?
I have a dentist in the market.
Yeah, but I did too, yeah. I should have gone to him more often. All right.
Well, here we are. Some of you who've been following the column will recognize this particular photo because it appeared only a couple years ago. Any guesses? This is our audience guess photo. Where could this be in Seattle?
Isn't it Paul's backyard?
It could be Paul's backyard. No, it's not. Where could this be? Any guesses?
Capitol Hill.
It's Capitol Hill is close, yeah.
Beacon Hill.
Beacon Hill is not so close. Hill Hill, it's a little bit north of Hill Hill. Let's just go there and check it out here.
Yeah, oh boy.
So that's a picture of the alley that that runs alongside I-5. It was taken by an Austrian photographer who moved to Seattle in '39 named Werner Lengenhager. He worked for Boeing and he spent decades of his life taking pictures of the city. And I think he's, where did you say the collection is that has much of his photo?
Well, some of it's at the University of Washington, some of it's at the Museum of History and Industry. A lot of it's at the Seattle Public Library. By the way, I am now going through my archive, which I had some help with Clyde here, not Clay, and I'm giving it to the Seattle Public Library.
Yes.
And it's a brutish gift because you've got to organize it. You've got to indicate what its values are and describe it, and that takes longer in life than you've got. So I'm not sure. If anybody wants to donate time, let me know, and we'll put you to work.
Well, Clay counted it up, and it's around 300,000 images that Paul's collected.
It's more than that.
Okay.
It's about two. It is more than that, frankly. It really is.
Well, you'll have to point Clay into the other
Clay,
basement.
it's more than that.
Well, this is 3rd and Union, a federal building, the post office. And in 1908, this lovely structure was put into place, and with these wonderful sandstone columns and steps from Chuckanut. And after about 50 years, 1958, so many pigeons had pooped on the porch here that the powers that be decided, well, let's tear it down and replace it with something the pigeons won't poop on. Because it stained the steps with this pigeon poop.
It had too good a taste, right?
Yeah.
This was a place where if you were living in Seattle prior to it being torn down, and you said, "Meet me at the steps," everyone would know that you meant the post office steps. And here they are, this kind of interim median space where people would meet. And today, here's what we have. Well, the steps are gone, replaced by a filing cabinet tipped over on its side, as it's been called. But as Paul will point out, it was even worse before they worked on the cladding. So I guess that's something. But there's no real meeting place here, except maybe if you're at the bus stop. We pop down to the docks. This is Hooverville in the mid-30s. About 250 of the 500 shacks are pictured here. And you can see Smith Tower hovering in the background, still the tallest building in the West at that point. And Port of Seattle got me a lift, and I got up there and took this shot, and there's Smith Tower again. And so occasionally we get help from people and sympathetic people in authority. Now, this is our PG-13 moment about to come up, because we're at the corner of 34th and Fremont, and the event that I decided to return and reshoot this photo was at the Fremont Fair. So be cautious if you're sensitive. I'm giving you a trigger warning right now. This is a 1940 picture of the last trolleys going into North Seattle, going up Finney Ridge. The downtown trolleys had all been disappeared and replaced by gasoline-powered engines and trackless trolleys. This is one of the last trolleys going up the hill. Within a year, all the trolleys were gone, and so to find a replacement for this lovely photo, I went to the Fremont Fair. And to replace the trolleys, we have a couple of women walking abreast. So.
Now, those of you who think it's indecent to show these in public scapes, please raise your hands and we'll count up your opinion and do nothing about it.
Nothing about it.
Here we are at the Go Hing Festival on King, 1921. This was a celebration of in Chinatown that lasted for several days, and in a certain sense, it celebrated these citizens who managed to avoid the Chinese Exclusion Act. So they persisted over decades. 86, we had a horrendous moment in our history in which we vanished a whole slew of Chinese who had finished working on the railway, and we tried to get rid of them all and send them home. Well, they maintained and held on, and these are their descendants, young men in 21, and I went back to this same spot. It's almost unchanged. The Hotel Milwaukee is still there, and I found at the Seattle Kung Fu Club, John Sifu Liang, with his entire club coming down, and there's the Hotel Milwaukee right up behind them. And if you want to know some marvelous, there's some wonderful tours of Chinatown taken out of the Wing Luke Museum, and they do some marvelous things. I'm about to take a class there in the next couple weeks.
Jean has just been asked to be the vice something chair.
Just Vice. Just call me Vice.
Anyway, he's going to be very much involved in the administration of HistoryLink. How many of you use HistoryLink?
Yeah, HistoryLink is a wonderful source for educators and amateur historians alike. If you haven't checked it out, go to HistoryLink. And I'm the vice chair of the board, which means I sit there when the chair is sick. Otherwise, I just look happy and conciliatory. Well, here we are.
You mean Marie?
Michael Sullivan is the chair.
Okay.
Marie is the founder of HistoryLink, and actually much of it is Paul and Marie and Walt Crowley who created it. This is their 20th anniversary, so it's a big year for HistoryLink this year. Well, this is 1906. It's a canoe trip down the Black River, and within a few years, another decade, the Black River disappeared. And it went away because we lowered Lake Washington to make a canal that went all the way out through Lake Union and the Ship Canal and the locks. And so the Black River, along with numerous tribal settlements of the Duwamish, disappeared. And what we see today is not much of the Black River remains. So it burbles up in a park in Tukwila, and occasionally on a heavy rain you'll see the sewers fill. But no canoes going down the Black River today. These are kids who were very good to Paul. They were on the cover of his very first Seattle Now and Then book from the mid-'80s.
They're the Brown children. Dad was a detective, Seattle Police Department. No, I beg your pardon. The kid turned out to be a detective. No, the dad was a plumber, and he played in Doc Pop Wagner's band. You know, the most cherished of the wind bands that played in the parks and marched in Seattle in the early 20th century. And so a friend of mine found the negatives for this photographer, plumber, musician in a thrift store in Grays Harbor. and gave them to me later. And they'll wind up at the Seattle Public Library like the rest of it.
These are photos that are just, they're treasures. What a sensitive eye this guy had. You know, he was obviously taking photos of his kids, but all these other pictures that he took are just, some of them are just glorious. They're beautiful. I love this one. Well, I went back. Now this is taken looking southeast in Lake Union. And there's a little bay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is that a sawmill?
Yes, it is a sawmill.
That's a sawmill, and that's where they have the sawdust is in that cone, that.
That's a sawmill just north of today's Mohi. It's just a little bit north.
Well, remembering the lake came in a bit further then than now, we'd more likely say that this was a little south of Mohi.
Oh.
So it's right there within 2 blocks.
Well, just to give you a sense, this is not East Lake, but West Lake that we're looking at here. That roadway in behind. So this entire stretch is a little inset bay. It's kind of an extra little bulge of water coming in. We're seeing, but that's West Lake there.
Is that
Yeah.
Clay Eals behind it, or down?
That's Capitol Hill.
Capitol. That was the east, not west.
No, that's West Lake.
Aren't you? That's Westlake.
It shows you just how far the lake extended. So it's, when you're looking at, that's why it's a surprise. East Lake is way on the other side, but this is West Lake coming down. Now we're in the little bay that kind of bulges out beyond, so it's not, this isn't the distance of the entire lake.
It was a popular place for swimming. It was a swimming hole, that little corner of the lake, the southeast corner of Lake Union. That's where you are right here, the southeast corner of Lake Union. It's all filled, of course, now with condos, new condos. We just drove by there earlier tonight. We're amazed at it. Yeah.
In 2011, for our Mohi show, I went with my neighbor's children, Tia and Liana Owen, and we took this picture, and I thought, you know, there's a now and then in there. There's a triptych in here, because Tia and Liana are, this is 8 years later, so we went back, and these kids, this is the beginning of last year, and Tia drives now. She goes to Roosevelt, she's 16, which is terrifying. There's the Kalakala. Look up on the decks here. We're going through the locks. Hundreds and hundreds of people on this voyage in 1948, coming out from Lake Union back to the Sound. There are people in the windows here. It's jam-packed. Now pay attention up here. We're going to revisit this wheelhouse in just a moment, but look at how that sits up on top. And the skipper sat up there and steered the craft without a lot of visual aid. But down here we have our towboat, we have our calacal. This is another example of, I had to wait about a month going back to the locks, and I asked them, what could I substitute here for the calacal? And they said, well, on February 27th at 6:30 in the morning, we have the USS Turner Joy, which has just been restored in Lake Union and is going back to its Bremerton berth, where it's a museum ship. And only after taking this photo did I come to understand that the Turner Joy was the ship that came to the aid of the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964. So it's directly tied to, there were 2 attacks, and the first one was actual, the second one was fictional. The first one, there was a Vietnamese gunboat that I guess shot over the bows of the Maddox, and the Turner Joy came to its aid. And the second one, most likely were bogeys, or they never occurred, but it was on that second attack in which led us into the war and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. So,
Just a few deaths.
Yeah.
just a couple.
Now, whenever you hear in this this lecture, about how hard he worked, he claims he just said, I had to come back here and keep coming back about this, to get something to replace the Kalakala. Just think about all the times he had to tell his wife that he was just too busy to vacuum the rugs. That's also what it's about. That's part of the meaning of that, okay?
And so there's a whiff of shame, of sulfur in the creation of anything. Well, I asked you to look at the wheelhouse. It still remains. It's about the only part of the colloquial that still remains. It is, our flying bird is no more, but if you go out to Salty's in West Seattle, right on the shore there's the bridge. And Clay actually went out, who's a West Seattleite, took this photo. He's now going to demonstrate the sound
Come forward, Clay.
of the colloquial.
How many of you actually rode on the colloquial? Yes, there are a couple in here. Its last ride was in the summer of 1967, and it was very shortly before that I got to ride on it as part of my high school stage band. And we went over to Bremerton for the Olympic College Stage Band Festival. And I remember so distinctly the sound, because it was cavernous and dark, and spider webs up above, and the upper floors were not available to us. And when the boat's engines took off, it made this just harrowing sound. You thought the thing was going to fall apart. Imagine that for an hour all the way over to Bremerton.
Let's have him do that again, okay?
Actually, Paul does this rather well. He says he wants all of us to say this. Are you ready?
Are you ready?
1, 2, 3.
That's on tape now, right?
Absolutely.
So was it a ferry?
Yes.
It was a ferry?
Yes. One of a
Ferry
kind.
built in the mid-30s.
Didn't it go to Alaska?
It did. It became a fish.
And
Yeah,
then
it
it
became a
came
cannery in
back
Alaska.
here.
It came back. It was a subject of sad battles and struggles.
And sat on Lake Union.
It did. It did. There are photos of it on Lake Union.
Yeah.
It's had a few other places too.
Yeah, it wandered all
And on the
around.
very day before it was scrapped in Tacoma, Jerry Kingen, owner of Salty's on Alki, drove down to Tacoma and decided he wanted to salvage parts of it, including the wheelhouse and the drivetrain. And if you drive over to West Seattle on Harbor Avenue, you can see this. It's just sitting out. He has an unusual sense of public art. So this is something you can go see any time of day or night.
And looking from the inside, Jerry's positioned it so it still looks out at the Seattle sky.
Jerry's picture?
No, this is Clay's, but Jerry's has positioned.
Yeah, I know Jerry.
Yeah.
I know Jerry from when he almost got shot.
Well, here we are.
Behind Blue Moon Theater.
Here we are on top of the viaduct. And this is the day before it opened, within a couple days. Opened April 4th, 1953. This is maybe April 2nd, maybe April 1st. And it was taken looking up at the Smith Tower, still the tallest building in Seattle. And look at those red coats. Aren't those delightful? Well, I went back and I got a red car. Well, this building is significant in a number of ways. Partly because Paul and Clay and I all agree that it's really quite lovely. Sometimes a building will appeal to you, and without knowing what it was or the story behind it, I approached it from below. And there you can see the Methodist dome. It has this wonderful sort of, I described it as lightning going up.
So this is looking south on?
This is looking south on 4th Avenue. This is a building called the Mark, or the F5 building today. It was designed by an architectural firm under the instruction of Eric Daniels. I have my name in his notes. I think it's Eric Daniels, who was a developer and a great fan of an actress of the late 50s and early 60s. And he wanted a building that would reflect the grace, the style, the savoir-faire of this actress. And let's take a look at the picture that they put up in the building's lobby for the workers to file past as they came to work every day.
For inspiration.
For inspiration. So think who you might who could you imagine that would inspire such devotion?
Marilyn
And,
Monroe. Oh, yes.
Audrey Hepburn.
and this is the photo that they had up in the lobby. And look at that cigarette holder and the way her shoulders and her, I mean, you can see that.
You know, those guys got sued because the reflection of the sun off of that caused an accident on the freeway.
That's right, I
It was
heard
a
that.
big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to dull it down.
Yeah, that's right.
Did they actually have to dull it down?
I don't know what they did about it, probably just settled
know,
the
they
lawsuit.
They had to change the reflective quality of the glass at some point
Yeah, it was
where
a
they
big
could.
deal, a big pile.
Well, here's a commemoration from, this is from '89, and you'll see a future mayor. There's Greg Nichols and his son, and there's Sharon Nichols, and this is Georgette Valley over on one side. And there, in '89, Clay Eals here led a movement to save the Admiral Theater, which was up on top of the hill as you come up by Seattle.
Has anybody been to the Admiral Theater in West Seattle? Have you been in the last 30 years? You wouldn't have been able to do it had our organization not got it landmarked. Imagine 3 nights before it was announced as closing night by Cineplex Odeon, we organized a picket. We had 50 people there. We, with these great signs, all of our state legislative delegation, Greg, who was our King County councilman and then later mayor. But look at the marquee. Could you have a better last movie on the marquee than Dirty Rotten Scoundrels? We didn't know a thing about landmarking. It was the 29th day into my term as president of the Historical Society, but 6 months later, we landmarked the theater. We sold 1,300 Save the Admiral buttons. This is before the internet. We got 4,000 petition signatures. We packed public meetings. This is what the Admiral looked like when it opened in 1942. And then to celebrate the fact that it was remodeling into 4 screens without harming any of the historic features of the building, Jean kindly came out and shot a group hug photo. Look at this. This is 850 elementary school kids from Lafayette, Schmitz Park, and Alki schools who walked to this and heard Greg Nichols and Norm Rice talk to them about the importance of preservation. So you can do it. You can
Did they
do
all
it.
kiss or something?
It was just a big hug. They don't kiss in elementary school.
I think I
Tell.
did.
You're just going back to that concert you.
Yeah, you're thinking that. Well, this is an interesting photo because it reveals a number of firsts. One, it is at this point the oldest structure in Seattle, still standing.
Anybody know which one it is? Isn't that kind of revealing, really, that we don't know? A group as sophisticated as this one does not know what is the oldest standing structure in Seattle.
It's not celebrated. There's no plaque in front of it. There's a little plaque at the end of the street. It's still in West Seattle. And this oldest structure has an interesting history because it was Doc Maynard, David Maynard, moved out with his wife Catherine to West Seattle, exchanged.
They were pioneers.
They were pioneers in the 1850s. They exchanged their land in downtown, near Pioneer Square, for 300 plus acres in West Seattle and moved out there and started a farm, which failed. It didn't do very well. But they moved out in 58. They moved out in the mid-50s, and by 58, the house that Maynard built had burned down. This is the house that he built to replace it. In another decade or so, they sold it to the Hanson family. And the Hanson family is marked by, there's young, what was her first name, Paul?
April.
April Hanson. Here's her mom. Here's her father. Here's Snidely Whiplash. And there's some young Swede peeing on the side of the house, that whippersnapper. Well, they're also, April is also the mother of the Seattle figure who lent Paul this photo.
What do you want me to say?
Name.
Ivor Haglund.
Oh.
That was his mom there on the far left. Yeah, Ivor had this in the top drawer of his desk. One of the first things he showed to me, actually. That and the deed of the house to his family from Doc Maynard.
Where is that house?
We're going to take a look at it.
We're not going to tell you.
But let's take a look. Here's members of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society in Clay on the far left, standing in front of the house, which we took a summer and a half ago. And so it's, but the current owners have actually painted the front and trimmed down the bush, and it looks pretty darn good. It doesn't have that wing on it. It doesn't have this extra structure. That's been removed. But it does, the basic, you can see the basic outline is the same. And if you go down to the basement, the original timbers knocked into place by Doc Maynard are still there. Now this is, and it is the oldest structure in Seattle. It's on 64th, about, what, Clay, a block and a half up from...
Yeah, but the address is in the book, so you'll have to get the book.
That's smart, Clay.
Did Ivor grow up in the house?
A little bit. He didn't actually grow, they were nearby. His dad owned the property now because he was married to the daughter who inherited it. So he built quite a few houses on 64th. And they had built one that they lived in, which wasn't this one, but it was nearby.
Did you have a question?
No, we just live 2 blocks from that.
Oh, really? So you know exactly where it is. You could lead the tour.
We walk past it all the time. I never knew the history.
Did you?
know the history?
You didn't? Oh.
If you go
Well-
down to Alki from 64th, just go down that half block to Alki, look straight down on the sidewalk. There is about an 8-line concrete marker.
We live on 62nd, so.
Okay.
Yeah, just right there.
Well, now you can tell your friends that you know where the oldest, this is older than all the bricks downtown. This is older than any other structure in Seattle. You live 2 blocks from it. So,
Unless you can find one that's older.
Challenge.
Well, I'll tell you, maybe William Gross's home that's still on the National Register, and it's up in the central area of Seattle,
Yeah.
might match that. But I'll tell you, my grandmother grew up right across the alley,
Yeah.
and she'd look out her
From that
window-
house you're
From
talking
that
about.
house.
Right. Yeah.
She'd look down and see Ivor
Yeah.
playing in the backyard when he was a kid, and she said, you know, that kid is never going to amount to anything.
Where was her home where she was looking down?
She was in West Seattle.
Okay.
I never knew the address, but she would tell years later. I mean, she was in her 90s.
I
at the
think
time,
she
but
probably said that because he was rather small, maybe. I mean, why would she assume that this kid would never amount to anything?
It was Ivor. Well, I knew Ivor, but I'll tell you, he was unique.
What does that have to do to answering your?
I have no idea.
You know, you're unique,
So what would be the?
especially in your genes.
what were you saying?
So what was the year that house would have been built then?
Early 1860s. It's his house burned down in '58, so he may have built it in the next year. But it's certainly the oldest we know of. Yeah.
William Gross.
Well, this is another story of another house where we've only got a couple more pictures in the show. And this is a picture of, it's connected to Doc Maynard in a certain sense because he was Chief Seattle's physician. And this is Chief Seattle's daughter, Kiki Soblu, or nicknamed by Catherine Maynard, Princess Angeline. Until November of the year before last, so in November of 2017, no one quite knew where this little house was located. We knew it was below Western, it was somewhere below the market, but precisely it was a bit of a mystery until Ron Edge, who collaborates on the column and finding photos for us at Mohi and triangulating and figuring stuff out with Paul, he did a bunch of work and discovered using the stumps and the eaves and the structures that exist and comparing them with photographs of in relation to other structures, And he came up with a pretty close approximation of the location, and we went back with Ron, and here's where Princess Angeline's porch was. So Ron's sitting on the, what he guesses is the porch. On the left is the Pike Place Market garage. On the right is the Fix Medor building, and this is still an open space. That was kind of the marvel here, is that almost everything below Western is filled in. But this little open space is still open, filled up to Western with bamboo, and it's and you can also see kind of the slope of the original hill that came down. This is what confronted the early settlers as they looked at Seattle, and they were there on the waterfront. They looked up and said, "My gosh, that's a steep hill." Yeah, Clay?
And you can't tell from the photo, but it is fenced in, so you can't walk to get to where Ron is in the photo. However, have you been to the market and eaten at Lowell's, the restaurant in the market? Go to the second floor and sit next to the windows of the second floor, look straight down, there you are. Next time you're at the market.
Okay.
Well, we have another final shot of Princess Angeline Kisoblu, and she's now, in this photo, sitting, probably taken in the early 1890s. She's sitting in what is now Post Alley, then Pike Street, just below First Avenue, where it crosses First. And we did an inset of her father, Chief Seattle, a studio portrait. And we have them together because in our modern repeat, we have Mary Lou Slaughter, who's the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Princess Angeline.
Wow.
And next to her is Ken Workman, who is the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle through his second wife. And so they came down, and Mary Lou, look at that face. She's one of the great cedar workers and basket weavers alive today, and she created those shawls, the vest that Ken's wearing, and her basket work is just is prized wherever it ends up, museums and private collections. She's 80 years old.
What?
Wow.
So, it is your age.
It's not fair.
I know, it's not fair to any of us.
Wow. 80 years old, wow.
She's 80 in that photo?
Yeah.
This was taken last spring.
Yeah.
She's 80 in this photo. So Ken is 66, 67, but look at Mary Lou.
He
That's
looks like, a Hollywood,
yeah, they both look kind of Hollywood, don't they? They're...
Hollywood.
So as we took this photo, we spent about 10 minutes. Here's a shot of me taking the picture. Clay took this photo, and you can see I had them take off their hats because the shadows were too fierce, but these gorgeous cedar hats were in our supplies. We took this photo, and Ken kept looking around, and he was feeling
like this.
He was feeling a little bit. He wasn't doing that. He wasn't doing that. Don't lie. He kept flipping around and to see if there was someone behind him, and he kept saying, "Gene, let's get this going." And after the shoot, we spent about 10-15 minutes on the location here, and we went down to Ivar's and had some happy hour treats. And I said, "Ken, what was going on there?" And he said, "Well, someone was trying to get through." And I said, "Really? What do you know?" Clay and I watched the whole time, and we didn't see anyone trying to get through. He said, "Well, they tapped me on the elbow." And there were, I think, 3 of us were sitting there watching this, and nobody saw anyone tap Ken on the elbow. So now Ken has interpreted this as a nudge from history, from a distant cousin who once sat on this same spot. And I can't, it's an experience that he just, it was kind of extraordinary for him, and he loves to tell the story. If he were here tonight, he'd tell you the same thing. And I think of that same nudge when I find myself looking through the eyes of a photographer that shot a picture 100 years ago, or 75 years, or 120 years. and suddenly everything locks into place, and I feel that view. It comes to life in its own way. So I can understand that nudge, so it's never actually tapped me on the elbow.
Don't ever try this in court.
And that's it. Here's Paul up on Gasworks, taken by our French friend Béranger in 2011. Master of the Universe.
You guys gonna ask questions?
And
or
that's-
do you wanna, huh?
The one of books. Well, let's do it. So that's the show. Thank you so much for coming, and please join us up front. We'll sign a few books and write your name on them.
Give us a minute to set up, but you'll come and you'll pay me. I'll be over on the left. Cash, check, or credit card are fine. And then Jean and Paul will inscribe your book. And as Paul says, if you want to get more than one, you may want to make it a gift. And so think about how you want them to personally inscribe it for you.
We are down to, I think we've got a few hundred to get us through. At this point, we aren't getting any books in until June, earliest June maybe, or beginning of
Really,
July. So
that's a
we're
shame.
going to try to get through
Well,
the
listen
beginning
to
of
that, be
tourist season.
forewarned, you know, boy, you're gonna